And welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. We left out on the note, who is setting the agenda in the media? Is it actually the practitioners seated at this table, or is it someone else? Eric, the government seems to believe that it's the opposition running our headlines.
The media acquired its space that Lena's accurately captured, that Kenyans consider it sacrosanct and totally inviolable, because it practiced a great tradition of restraint, objectivity, impartiality, and a devotion to verifying facts before reporting them. Now what has happened is that first there has been a general failure in capacity, coupled with the explosion of social media. The media is trying to catch up, because by the time a story comes up in tomorrow's headline or this evening's bulletin, it's been running on WhatsApp, it's been running on Facebook, and so on and so forth. So I think people are trying to compromise the editorial standards to cope with the turnaround time required in this context of social media. Now, people who set the agenda nowadays can be anyone. It can be a university student who wants to bust deadbeat dads. It can be a politician who just has an axe to grind with government and does not have a particular issue to leverage on. So he says there are mass graves in Mandera. It can be somebody who is not patient enough to wait for institutions like Auditor General or PAC saying that Eurobond has been stolen without giving any particulars. So what happens then is the media comes, because there is a very confused definition of objectivity, that to be seen to be objective, media must attack the government. Yeah. So it's a default setting. I'm not saying that it's also at all times, but most of the time media thinks that it's being objective when it's anti-government. But it's a bias as well. It's a bias as well. As a result of which, the Treasury, for instance, has burst itself completely trying to set the record straight on Eurobond. Nobody's listening. Nobody's listening, because for the media to say that perhaps we should wait for due process to take place, perhaps we should examine the facts, perhaps we should actually rethink this whole game, they will look like they're supporting the government, and that's what they don't want to do, because it will compromise their perception of objectivity. Now, number two, generally, yes, number two, there is the part of media being a lobby of its owners' interests, and that needs to be really examined. For example, digital migration particularly, and this government advertising, right? It wasn't our finest moment. As Kenyan
How about we hold the thought on digital migration, because I want that to be a separate conversation, but I want Linus to respond to what you've just said
just before I finish, so what happens is that the day's headlines and editorials and news bulletins on issues that touch on the interest of the capital that underwrites media in Kenya, it becomes some sort of advocacy. There's no other word for it. It becomes some sort of ownership advocacy and not media coverage or commentary or whatever it is else.
I think what is required is a clear understanding of the role of the media. What does the media do? What is the role of the media? So that when you wake up as a government functionary the next day and see a headline about corruption or corruption allegations, you don't see it as an opposition agenda, but you see it as the role of the media to play that space and tell the public what is going on. Eurobond, tell us what is going on. We have a situation here where the government doesn't appreciate, this particular government doesn't appreciate the role of the media. And what has happened, unfortunately, is the branding of media and media houses and media personalities. You know, you're either seen as pro-Jubilee or pro-Code. Why do we have that? Let's look at this. Go back to the history of Kanu rule. Look at the headlines that Nation ran during Moi's time, Standard ran during Moi's time, during Kibaki's time, and now during President Kenyatta's time. The thing is, when the media is functioning properly, it is almost always questioning the government, calling it to account, holding it responsible. So that is what happens.
Should it also laud it when it gets things right?
Not at all. Stand back. Objectivity, like he's saying that it's a very loose definition. It's not.
Let me ask you this. You're saying that we are objective when we question government when it does something wrong and hold it to account, but we're not objective if we agree with what the government is doing and say that was right.
The difference between agreeing and praising, you know, I think that's where you know, we need to do a distinction.
Or even not agreeing or praising, maybe just describing.
Because yes, I think that has happened. I mean, like this week we've been having the WTO talks. I think it's been the headline on certain newspapers for this.
Look at our headlines. Look at the headlines jointly when the country is under attack. Where do we fall? Right across. And we don't hold meetings to say, run this headline.
Right.
We know instinctively that the country is under attack. So on Al-Shabaab, for example, we don't have objectivity. We belong to our country. Well, the only other time we don't have objectivity is during football matches. We have to belong to our side.
Then we support Chelsea, no?
And also maybe Neno and his colleagues in government have not necessarily done a good job of, putting facts out there as they should be. So they would want to blame the media for not telling their story.
Right.
But on several occasions, we've given credit where credit was due.
Yeah.
When you see that the president has suddenly acted on an issue like corruption that people had been calling for a long time, we write editorials saying this is okay. But where the problem lies is where you have a situation where you can see that the Speaker of Parliament has, for instance, invited EACC to come and probe corruption in Parliament. They find there's a lot of, fraud and false mileage claims and, cooking of books in order to earn extra money. No MP decides that we need to investigate our conduct. Instead, the whole discussion is we have to discuss why the Speaker called EACC here.
Right.
The Speaker then goes on survival mode and sides with the MPs, because if he doesn't, he's losing his job. But nobody is questioning the issue of an MP who is claiming mileage for being in northeastern Kenya, and at the same time he's claiming mileage for being abroad. He's in two places at the same time. So when you find us tenaciously following an issue, it's not like we are campaigning. It's just that we are saying, hey, we pointed out something here. Can somebody do something about it? And we will continue to remind you until you don't want to.
But if you look at those scandals that you're talking about, did we really get to the bottom of the story, or did we have to rely on the opposition specifically to keep calling news conferences and say, look at this issue, look at the other? Where was the investigation and the conclusion?
I think, Anne, we've made the point earlier that there's a problem of capacity, and there's a problem of this constant pressure to go on air, so that the due diligence that you'd have where people follow stories. Think about Anglo Gold, Goldenberg, and Anglo Leasing rather, and Goldenberg, and these scandals where people followed the tracks for 1 to 2 years, and then you tell us to go to Parliament and follow the mileage claims. And very few people will have that time. I think we saw that, I think it was the Star, which started tallying up the donations made at Harambes and said nothing about it, but just said, this is the person's salary, this is how much they've given in Harambes, so you make the judgment, and that's our job. I disagree with Linus in the sense of objectivity. Yes, we hold to account, but yes, we give credit where it is due. And I think that's why we have such an antagonistic relationship. There must be a tension between the two, but not necessarily antagonism. We need them, they need us. Right? We need to uncover things, and you need to be in a position where people like the Speaker might be able to say, here are the documents, you didn't get them from me. But if we're not cultivating sources, how do we get that?
Right, Harun.
Yes, I think the whole issue of independence is very mythical. I don't believe on issues of independence, so to speak. But basically the point here is that the media has a role of checking the powers of the government and the powers of business institutions and so forth and so forth. That is the key responsibility of the media. And if it doesn't do that, even if it does all the other things, basically it is feeling its normative role. But number two, my biggest concern, and possibly it's a little bit different here, is the issues of values and ethics of the media. And the values that we are trying to socialize our society, our children, and that is one of the biggest gaps that we're now facing. For example, in the last 1 year, I have received 250 cases that are still pending because I have no commission. Out of 250 cases, 128 have to do with ethical issues.
Such as?
Values, the inappropriate content, the watershed hours, all those that are very common.
Highly sexualized content?
Yes, that are common in our FM radio stations and so forth. So basically that is one of the biggest challenges that we are facing, and maybe we need to address that. As Mo said, self-regulation here is very, very important. But again, the issues of scooping and competition and the tension between the profit orientation and the public interest again becomes a problem. And that is why investigative pieces cannot be common, because I cannot sustain investigation for 1 year because I need to improve my bottom line.
An interesting criticism that I've heard often and perhaps even believe is that a lot of that is true because the top leadership of media, unfortunately, is men. If more women held the positions, gentlemen, with all due respect, that each one of you holds right now, then we would have content that is more sensitive to family values, to issues of development, etc. Udwak, do you share a similar view?
Oh, wow. The token woman on the panel, that's that question. I would flip it around to say that if you're talking about stories that were big, a concern for Kenya in 2015, corruption definitely, security definitely, but also gender, the two-thirds gender principle. If it weren't for you hosting, I'd be the only woman out of 5 men that doesn't adhere to the two-thirds gender principle at all. I think that women bring something to the table, and Barack Obama was right to say you cannot play when half of your team is benched. But I don't think necessarily by virtue of a woman, you know, I'm put on this pedestal where I'm therefore more intelligent and more sensitive. We see stories of men killing families. We see stories of women killing families. I do think you need more balance within newsrooms, within editorial leadership, and Citizen, you know, certainly has that. I think the Nation Media Group, to some extent, has that as well. But I think what you need to be paying attention to is content that mirrors the values in the Constitution. Do we deliver that? We don't. Okay? When you come to adjudicating your value complaints, you will find media owners telling you about profits. Are you going to pay people? Okay, you will find them saying, well, why do you listen to it? You have a choice. Turn off your radio, turn off your TV. But while my ratings for sexualized content are this high, and my ratings for, you know, public interest content are this low, you know, it will continue. Right, Eric?
The other thing is, what do we get from when you cover an event, or when you cover, say, an event? Look at, for instance, a year or so ago, the President and the Minister for International Trade and Foreign Affairs invited everybody to the launch of the draft foreign policy, draft trade policy, and it was covered, and we didn't see much about it. They just covered essentially what the President said, what the Minister said, and moved on.
And not the issues.
And moved on. Then secondly, the President has been traveling quite a bit to all parts of the world with his delegations, right? No one has tried to track that foreign policy to what is actually being implemented now. No one has said, what is it bringing home? What are the outcomes of all these activities? But now we are covering and saying, he went with this person, we went with this 45 ministers, we went with how many PSS, and we went with... We're still again obsessing on personalities and where he went, because we think foreign travel is luxury, is holiday, is vacation.
But shouldn't that also be an aggressive part of your own communication strategy?
We do that, and it just dies because most people tell you at the desk, I don't see the story here, all right? I don't see the story here. For instance, you have to link this. We have to, just a moment. We have to link this, for instance, with, for example, the boost in foreign direct investment, which is very significant, all right? But just like coverage of, once things go to such technical detail, people just lose track. They just want to know what happened, what did you eat there, which hotels did you sleep in, right? Were you accompanied by politicians? Were you accompanied by government?
There's a lot of distortion on what the media really covers or questions when it comes to foreign trips. The media has been, and I can't speak broadly for everybody that has been covering the story, they've been just asking simple accountability questions in terms of how much exactly are you spending on these trips. Derek, there is no justification whatsoever in having 70 people attending the inauguration of the President of Nigeria. I don't see any benefit for the country. We are saying when you're talking about cutting costs, even the President taking a salary cut, then why does that translate to making these foreign trips reasonable? And I think that has been the tone of the coverage. Nobody questions the President's trips to other foreign countries because it's part of his duty.
We can go for an inauguration, but most of the time you will discover, if you look at the timetable, the program of the entire itinerary, there usually will be bilateral engagements. There usually will be signing of agreements and treaties. Nobody covers those things. So it has reached a point where now we have to set out and say, we cover this duty and it's worth this amount of money. And nobody wants it. There is no story in it, you understand? There's just no story in it.
When it comes to the issues
Yes, I was going to say, I have
so
the
the
privilege
people
of,
who go in these itineraries, most of them are technical people to go and support. For example, we take the Solicitor General or the Attorney General because they'll be signing of bilateral instruments, and they are supposed to be there. There'll be the people who developed it, there'll be the people who do the briefs, there'll be the, from ministries. For example, you can go and sign 4 instruments in one itinerary.
Yes,
There are people who come. There are people who come from the relevant departments.
forthcoming from the likes of people who sit where Angelo sits.
Yes.
I was saying I had the privilege of carrying the Pope on his visit in Africa. Now every morning at 5 a.m. I knew what the Pope was going to say between morning and evening. Like 8 hours before he said it, I knew it. Okay. Now that enables me to either research on what it is he's going to say, prepare well for it before he even says it. Now, like I said, this may help you if you can make information available under strict embargo rules. That might help in terms of in terms of content.
But the most surprising thing is on those interesting occasions when we happen to coincide. You go abroad and you find that the same event you have accredited your own people to go and cover the event, and they're missing. But they seem to find more interesting things. They seem to find more interesting things to do around the building.
Yes, there are 2 things.
Charles, you may need to elbow for your space on this.
Yeah, because it's talking across my head. But
it was just to respond directly to what you were saying, Eric, and that is a problem, not just within the media, but of people jollificating, going on a foreign trip and finding, other interesting things to occupy themselves with. But there is a point that Michael makes about the sophistication of your communication, right? I have worked largely internationally. I came back into the country 4 years ago. Linus also was out of the country, and I am accustomed to political officers that communicate, that say, this is what our duty bearer will be doing, this is what the person will say, this is a briefing for the media, you're all welcome, where you have a good relationship, where you don't go to this trip and then you're surprised to find Udwak or Linus or Michael there, and we don't know what it is we're supposed to be doing. Do you see? So that's the challenge to you and your colleagues.
Yeah, we have many countries where you have journalists from independent media accredited to the president. So when Obama is traveling to Kenya, he is coming along with journalists from Wall Street Journal and the rest. They are not State House or White House employees. But doesn't it make more sense if that could be implemented? I remember that suggestion was on the table, it didn't go anywhere. But if you took journalists from one journalist from every media house here, instead of taking the 70 people that Linus was talking about, they would probably then be able to produce more, instead of waiting for you then to come and write a press release that is always drafted in the same way and in an old-fashioned way that probably doesn't make sense to us. I think you should seriously consider having a unit of journalists accredited who can go. But when it comes to foreign trips, you might want to enumerate all the benefits, but there is still the public perception that where is our leader? I think for me the worst example was when Mandela happened. People have been butchered at a quarry, and then a picture emerges of the president watching Formula 1 at some Middle East country. The public perception remains, and they want to ask questions. They want to be told, they want reassurances that work is being done and their interest comes first. There was that thing you mentioned about women in newsrooms. I don't know whether, since you moved on, every time we provide internship opportunities to young journalists, and whenever they show up at the newsroom, I always have a pet talk with them and tell them, this is your first day. But specifically to the young women journalists who come, I tell them, you need to grow up the ladder to form the women who will be the future leaders of the media tomorrow. And the way to do it is to fight for the hard news with the men. Do not be the people who say we want to do features so that you're just writing soft things, 5 ways to know your girlfriend is cheating. And those things, they don't take you anywhere. So to all media women, do not agree to be given to write soft things. Do not yourself choose features and other things that don't really require you to go and push in the corridors with other people. It is doing that hard news, the politics and the tear gas, that makes you grow. You may end up being me thanking Michael Mumo one day for forcing me to cover politics, and now I just can't stop. We're taking a short break, and we're back with closing views, also discussing digital migration and the big one, how we covered the former CS and Waigoro. We're back in a moment.